off of the table, and you're saying, well, yeah, we're not using wealth in any way, we're just using risk. Fine, let's do that. If we want to be imposing a federal straitjacket on all of the states to be doing something that we want them to do in this field and threatening them with a Godfather offer to cut off their...
This may look like a routine amendment debate about bail policy, but it's actually a fight over how power moves in America, through law and through money. What's really being tested here is whether federal grants are being used as accountability tools or as political leverage to force uniformity across states. This raises broader questions about federalism, due process, and what happens when public safety becomes a funding switch in Washington. In this video, we'll break down the logic behind the bill, the pressure mechanics built into it, and what this debate reveals about who gets to set the rules, states, courts, or Congress.
Unanimous consent request from the gentleman from Georgia. Without objection. The gentleman from New Jersey is recognized for an amendment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have an amendment at the desk.
Clerk will report.
Amendment and the amendment.
Objection. The amendment will be considered as read. The gentleman is recognized to explain his amendment.
I reserve point of order, Mr. Chairman.
Point of order is reserved by the gentleman from Maryland.
Mr. Chairman, I strongly agree, I do agree with this bill's core goal. We should be incentivizing states and cities to stop policies that let dangerous criminals go free after committing serious crimes. As a committee, we've gone around the country and we see where these problems are. We've seen when judges and magistrates and prosecutors have let people out. And, I agree with the gentleman from Georgia, that a judge should have some discretion. And if it's a very minor crime, no, we shouldn't be holding them in prison. But they were releasing people that were guilty of crimes that were violent, guilty of crimes over and over again, who were flight risks, and mothers and daughters and brothers and fathers and sisters and all were murdered. And we saw them, we met them, we heard their testimony through the tears. It's wrong and it's unfair unto the law-abiding citizens. That said, this bill is too broad. It sweeps in states like New Jersey, who I'd be the first to admit has a system that lacks in some ways. But while New Jersey has sharply reduced the use of cash bail, the state has not eliminated it. And it allows judges to retain the ability to detain dangerous individuals pre-trial. The distinction matters a lot. We have to do this surgically. We have to use a scalpel and not a sledgehammer. My amendment makes a narrow common sense fix. It ensures that states or jurisdictions that employ a risk-based bail system that includes pretrial detention are not automatically stripped of burn JAG funding under this bill. Those burn JAG funds are critical. Those grants are critical. They are heavily relied upon by local law enforcement in my district and in every district throughout the United States of America. I have heard from the FOP, the PBA, the state troopers, and the list goes on. Real people doing a real job, good police officers. These are men who may not even always like what their state has done, but they should not be punished, and they want to keep their communities safe. If we cut off this funding, we make it actually harder for them, not easier for them, to do their jobs and keep New Jerseyans safe. This amendment preserves the bill intent to go after jurisdictions that have truly and fully, completely abandoned public safety, while avoiding the unintended consequences for law enforcement in states that maintain at least some meaningful safeguards. I urge all members to vote yes on the adoption of this amendment, and Mr. Chairman, I yield back.
Gentleman yields back. Recognize the ranking member, and then I'll make a statement.
Mr. Chairman, this is the first time seeing it, and I'm wondering if the distinguished gentleman from New Jersey would yield to a few questions about it.
I will yield, yes.
As I understand it, the amendment establishes a carve-out essentially for New Jersey.
And I don't want to interrupt you right as you start. It is not just for New Jersey. This would affect some other states as well. States that do allow pretrial detention, states that do give the judge the right also clearly to do that. And in New Jersey, which happens to be my state, that right exists. It's not used often, but it is used. And I believe that's important because for states like that, I don't think that you should remove their JAG, the burn JAG funding, which is really important.
Yeah. Well, and this is why we oppose the bill, because as you're saying, the JAG funding is extremely important for all of our communities and all of our jurisdictions. When you say it's not used that often, I'm afraid I don't understand the import of that statement. As I took it, this is New Jersey's system. New Jersey has moved away from cash bail and uses a risk-based bail system in every single case. Isn't that right?
That is correct. The system that they use is one that has allowances in it, though, for those areas that I just discussed. In other words, it allows you to detain people when you should. Look, this would all be good if we had good judges and good magistrates that did their job all the time.
I got
I'm
you.
talking around the country. People have been released over and over again that should be. And in those jurisdictions where they completely...
All right, you know what, I'm going to come back to you. Let me just reclaim my time so I can at least expound a little bit of where I am on this, and you can respond to it. It seems to me that we have proven well that the purpose of bail is to guarantee the appearance of the defendant at trial, to prevent flight risk, and to prevent any security risk that the person might pose to the community. In that case, whether the person is destitute and can't pay anything, or they're a multi-billionaire, or they're Jeffrey Epstein and they can put up the money easy, it should make no difference. So I don't understand why all of this fervor has been mobilized against cashless bail. That's not the issue. We should make sure that bail decisions are being based on the risks of the person to the community, or the risk that the person will hit the road and not show up in court. So I'm very drawn to the gentleman's amendment for New Jersey and any other states that might be in a similar posture, but it completely unravels the logic of the bill itself. Because the bill itself is attacking jurisdictions that have said they don't want bail to be a question of money and how wealthy you are or how poor you are. And so we're just mixing apples and oranges. You take that point off of the table and you're saying, well, yeah, we're not using wealth in any way, we're just using risk. Fine. Let's do that. If we want to be imposing a federal straitjacket on all of the states to be doing something that we want them to do in this field and threatening them with a Godfather offer to cut off their JAG fund money, let's do it for making sure that they're using a risk-based system. But why are we targeting the ones who have decided that cash bail doesn't help? Yeah, so in other words, I just think the logic of your amendment is to dissolve the entire bill.
It is not, and it's clear in the way that I say it. It is focused, the bill would be focused, and I believe that was the sponsor's intent, on those jurisdictions that have been capricious and cavalier in the way they've just let out real bad folks. I don't know how else to say it, over and over again. You all were with us on many of these visits as we went around the country and actually interview people that had been harmed, killed, raped, beaten by individuals that had a clear history that they posed a risk and danger to the community,
Okay, just to
or
reclaim my
that
time
they
for a
were a
sec. So
flight
the
risk.
problem there is they're not paying attention to risk. The problem is not that they're failing to charge someone $50,000 or whatever. The point is they're not paying attention to risk. So how does this bill even help?
May I
the
answer
problem?
that?
Yes.
That is the point. So since they aren't paying attention to risk and some of it doesn't enter into some of their systems at all, this bill is to ensure that risk is something that should be evaluated and considered. Yet at the same time, if you have a system that is somewhat different than others, and there are numbers that are all throughout the country, that there should be room for those to still get that funding, as long as they're not, in plain English, letting bad people out over and over again. I guess you want me to yield back, right?
It's the gentleman's- the
Well,
gentleman's-
so
Actually, you want me to.
So you just Mr. Chairman, I really have to think about this one because,
Yeah, I hear you.
but obviously
I have thought about
I'm
it.
sympathetic to what the gentleman is saying, and jurisdictions that have gotten rid of cash bail but are using risk are doing the right thing from their perspective, and certainly a reasonable thing. But it does seem like a bit of self-pleading because generally the bill is coming in like a sledgehammer against other jurisdictions, and that doesn't seem right. So I'm going to think about it. But thank you, Mr. Chairman. I yield back.
Appreciate that 5-minute dialogue so we can think about it. The gentleman from New Jersey is a great member of this committee, does outstanding work as our chair of the Oversight Subcommittee. We appreciate that, appreciate him offering this amendment, but I think this does, as frankly, as the ranking member said, kind of unravels what the bill's trying to do. So I would oppose the amendment and appreciate the thoughtfulness that it was brought forward, appreciate the discussion that took place, but I think that I actually jotted down, completely unravels the objective of the legislation. So let's, if gentlelady from California is recognized.
You know, this was an intriguing amendment because as I was listening to my colleague from New Jersey talk about his system, and so to be clear, you're saying that New Jersey has implemented a risk-based system that you feel works.
And to be very clear, I don't feel that it always does work as well as it should. Full disclosure, and this is, you'll find this interesting, it was a Republican governor, you know his name, Chris Christie, when this system was put in place, and it was a very popular piece of legislation when it was done in New Jersey, had many Republican and Democratic supporters, the system that we have in New Jersey, and I'll wrap this up in a second. I had a lot of serious questions. I sat on the Budget Committee where this actually went through and had some concerns, and I think we could have done more and done a little better, but I don't think it's so bad that they shouldn't get the funding. It is the police that asked me for this.
Yeah, so I'm going to cut you off because it's my minutes, but I like what you said because, obviously nothing is pure, but it sounds like more often than not, this risk-based system works. And, we actually have a system like this in the liberal haven of San Francisco and also in the liberal bastion that is Los Angeles. And to your point, these systems work as well because you are integrating conditions of release, judicial discretion, and assessment tools. But I also am confused because it does seem like it would be a carve-out just for one state, and it does seem like the antithesis of what we just debated with the 5213, keep violent criminals off the streets. And why would it just be for one state or for other localities that enjoy this so that they can get the burn JAG funding, which I think we all agree is important. And to your point, it's law enforcement that is asking.
May I answer that real quickly?
About which part?
It isn't just for one state. There would be a number of states, and it is to ensure, the bill would still ensure that the money is used properly. And that's the point.
Yeah, but I think all of us want the monies that are given to these programs to be used.
But they're not. I yield back
Well,
to you.
but it really does fly in the face of the underlying bill. And so what's good for the goose is good for the gander. I think most law enforcement agencies are saying, hey, why get rid of this funding? That goes to support the courts, it goes to support prosecution, it goes to support mental health with our community-based partners that we're working with to make our communities more safe. It does all of the things that if you care about safer cities and communities, you would want. And so it should be funding that all states have the opportunity and the eligibility to enjoy. I think that's what sort of boggles my mind. I certainly am not one of those people that says, give the money only to California and don't give it to New Jersey. If New Jersey has some systems that are working, that have been voted on by the people.
Real quickly, I wouldn't say that either. And I
haven't yielded to you, sir. I actually wanted to yield the rest of my time to my ranking member, and then he can probably ask you the questions. I do like your orange tie, though.
Thank you very much, the distinguished gentlelady from California. Look, first of all, the New Jersey system that was adopted by Governor Christie, the cashless bail, risk-based system adopted by Governor Christie, has been working, as I understand it. There's an interesting report from the Brennan Center for Justice on bail reform and public safety on evidence from 33 different jurisdictions. I recommend it to everybody highly to check it out. But I mean, it seems to me that back to Mr. Van Drew, if you would for 1 second, when you say a risk-based bail system, when I got to law school, in the middle of the 20th century, okay, in the 1980s, we were taught that bail was all about the risk of flight and the risk to other people in the meantime. You don't want people reoffending, and you don't want people disappearing. Okay, so is that the system that you mean, or did you mean something else by a risk-based bail system? Because that is what the bail system is. It's a risk-based. It always has been.
That is a system I mean, still have some concerns with it on an objective level. They use an algorithm. That makes me nervous sometimes. I'm open to it. I'm all due disclosure. When that came forward at the urging of Governor Christie and others, bipartisan, in committee and on the floor, I voted for it. I voted for it to give it a chance. I just have some concerns. There are other jurisdictions where it seems to me that over and over again, as I've said before, they're letting bad people out.
Well, yeah, but that can happen under a cash
legislation
system.
To me would address
when you say
that.
they're letting bad people out, let's try to have some analytical clarity about it. That's true under cash systems and cashless systems. There are always mistakes that happen in this direction or that direction, right? So
I think it's worse under cashless systems. I do.
Yeah. Okay, so I'm not sure whose time it is, but I'm happy to yield back, Mr.
The
George.
gentlelady's time has expired. Do any other members seek recognition? The question occurs on the amendment offered by the gentleman from New Jersey. Those in favor say aye. Those opposed say no. In the opinion of the chair, the noes have it and the amendment is not agreed to. A record vote is requested. The clerk will call the roll.
It was a small phrase, almost casual in how it landed. Isn't that right? But in that hearing room, it hit like a gavel, not because it was loud, because it demanded clarity in a place that often survives on ambiguity. You watched Representative Van Drew step forward with an amendment he described as narrow, common sense, and surgical. A scalpel, not a sledgehammer. His message was framed as a practical correction. don't punish jurisdictions that have moved away from cash bail if they still allow judges to detain people who pose a serious risk before trial. And you watched Ranking Member Raskin lean into the contradiction, not with a slogan, but with a lawyer's precision. He didn't just disagree with the amendment, he forced the argument to show its bones. Because what was really being debated here wasn't one state's carve-out or one line of grant language. It was the fundamental story America tells itself about justice. Van Drew spoke in the language of urgency. He invoked the pain of communities, the consequences of repeated failures, the human cost when institutions don't do their job. He spoke about judges, prosecutors, and magistrates who, in his view, have been capricious and cavalier, not measuring risk, not applying discretion, and leaving ordinary citizens to pay the price for elite negligence. He tied that outrage to a very specific lever of federal power: burn JAG funding. He argued that cutting it off would punish the very officers trying to hold the line, men and women doing a hard job, trying to keep communities stable while the politics swirl above them. And then came Raskin's question, the kind that strips the paint off an argument. He summarized what New Jersey actually does: a risk-based system in every case, not based on how much cash someone can put on the table, but on whether they're likely to flee and whether they pose a threat to the community. And he asked again, isn't that right? And Van Drew answered, yes, that is correct. In that moment, the hearing revealed something deeper than partisanship. It revealed a central tension in American governance. When people are frightened, Washington reaches for force. But when force is applied broadly, it often collides with the values it claims to defend. Raskin's point wasn't that mistakes don't happen. He acknowledged that errors occur under every system. His point was moral and structural. If bail is supposed to be about risk, not wealth, then why mobilize a federal crackdown against jurisdictions that removed money from the equation? Why punish systems designed to treat the wealthy and the destitute by the same standard? Why swing a financial weapon at communities, threatening their funding with what he called a Godfather offer, when the very tool you're using affects the courts, prosecution, local enforcement, and even community-based support systems? Because this is how federal power works in the modern age. It doesn't always arrive with soldiers. It arrives with grant conditions, with budget hooks, with incentives that feel like choices until you realize they're not. A state can comply, or it can watch resources vanish. And when those resources are tied to public safety, choice becomes a political illusion. Van Drew insisted his amendment didn't dissolve the bill, that it focused the bill on jurisdictions that, in his words, let bad people out over and over again. He tried to keep the argument pinned to one moral frame: the government must protect the public from repeat dangers. And that instinct resonates because it speaks to the oldest duty of the state: to maintain order. But Raskin kept pulling the conversation back to first principles. If the problem is that officials aren't paying attention to risk, then the solution is to fix how risk is assessed and enforced, not to resurrect a money-based system by attacking reforms that tried to remove it. And then the hearing widened. The gentlewoman from California didn't merely criticize the amendment. She exposed what makes this entire fight so politically combustible. Even those sympathetic to reform recognize how easily federal legislation can become a blunt instrument. She talked about cities like San Francisco and Los Angeles using risk-based models, integrating judicial discretion, conditions of release, and assessment tools. And she, too, returned to the same contradiction. If burn JAG funding is important, and everyone agrees it is, why build a law that threatens to rip it away? That question is bigger than one bill. It is a question about the American reflex to punish systems rather than repair them. And then there was the quiet admission that should linger with you long after the roll is called. Van Drew acknowledged the algorithmic tools used in the risk-based approach make him nervous. He voted for the system. He gave it a chance. But he remains uneasy. That is not a trivial detail. Because it highlights something essential about our era. We are increasingly outsourcing judgment, moral judgment, to systems that claim to quantify human behavior. And when those systems fail, the political instinct is not always to refine them carefully. It's to swing back to older, simpler mechanisms: cash, force, broad penalties, the kinds of levers that feel decisive because they are easy to pull. In the end, the chair said the amendment unravels the objective of the legislation. The voices were called. The noes had it. The amendment failed. And yet, nothing truly ended. Because the real story here is not the vote. It's the shape of the argument. It's the way Washington debates justice, with competing appeals to safety and fairness, with competing definitions of what accountability looks like, and with constant pressure to turn complex local realities into national talking points. A single phrase, "Isn't that right?" became the moment where rhetoric was forced to meet logic, where ideology collided with the mechanics of law, where the room had to confront whether it was punishing disorder or a scene or punishing reform. This is what leadership looks like in the American system. Not only the power to pass laws, but the responsibility to ensure those laws do not become weapons against the very communities they claim to defend. When government acts with a sledgehammer, it may look strong on television. But strength without precision becomes cruelty in practice, and precision without courage becomes excuse. So the question for the country isn't simply whether bail is cash or cashless. The question is whether justice is going to be built around risk and responsibility applied evenly, or around leverage and fear applied selectively. If you want more coverage that cuts through the talking points and follows the real power underneath the headlines, subscribe to Liberty Report USA. Support our work to expose the truth. Because in a system built on pressure and persuasion, the public's attention is the last check that still matters.